When building or repairing, you may need to take a piece of sheet metal and form it into something a little more desirable than just a hot dog bun. Things like domes, fender flares, patch panels, or even a helmet require shape. There's a button somewhere to watch this video. Shape is when you stretch or shrink a material. However, because this is a beginner's guide, we're gonna start with the basics of shrinking. In this video, we will cover 5 different ways to shrink steel, ranging from using simple to more advanced tooling. Let's dig in. If you wanted to turn this piece of paper into a dome, it would be physically impossible to do it without overlapping the edges. Let me demonstrate. First, we need to start with a circle. So let me just use this piece of used sanding paper that I found laying on the floor because I am irresponsible, and we'll use that as a template. If I wanted to turn this into a dome, it would require me to fold the edges over itself. So if I were to take this and push it down like a bowl, it crinkles up because that material has to go somewhere. To make it into a dome, I'd be almost making like a flower here and wrinkling this paper over top itself, much like that, which is actually a way to be able to read panels when you're shaping metal, but that'll be in a later video. It's a little bit more advanced technique that we're doing today. Now, this still isn't quite a dome. In fact, it's more like a flat side, a flat top, and a flat side again, which means that if I would have to also additionally wrinkle even further closer to the edge to make it even more round. When we made the helmet in a previous video, we went over that pretty significantly, but we're gonna go over that again today. I mean, it's hard to visualize because it's a piece of paper, but now it's a little bit more round. This translates to metal as well, and I'm gonna show you actually how it's gonna exactly translate by making a piece of metal look like this. Roger's back in the house. Oh yeah, I need metal too. Just like with the paper, I need to start with a circle to make a dome. And this leads us into the first way we're going to demonstrate shrinking steel, and that's using a shrinking stump. After I cut this. This is a stump that Tony and I hollowed out to make it have a little bit of a bowl to it, and it can now be used for shrinking because of that. I neglected to film this because we did this like 3 years ago. However, there's a couple photos that Logan probably has popping up on the screen right now to show that process. So here's how this works. Much like the paper, if I were to take Roger here and make a little dent right here, I can use this bowl and crinkle the metal. Now, everywhere I'm hitting with the mallet is in fact causing a little bit of stretch. However, we're not focusing on the stretch today. This just happens to be a byproduct of this particular method. So as I am using this dish, which I wish was a little bit deeper, which we've discussed many times, you'll notice that I get these little creases right here, right? What I'm gonna do after I get a good crease is use the edge of the dish and hammer it into itself. And if you aren't familiar with metal shaping, it may be confusing to you how that shrinking can be done. So maybe we should go over to the whiteboard quick. Let's pretend that this is a crease that's on the edge of a panel right here, right? When you're hammering a force down onto the peak of that, it's pushing it inwards on itself, which will make the surface area smaller, thus shrinking it. Which is kind of funny to think about because what it also is doing is making the panel thicker at the same time. So in shrinking the surface area, that material has to go somewhere. You end up with a thicker material overall. Future Ryan here. I realized I could have done better explaining this whole shrinking stretching thing with a different medium. As you can see, this disc is relatively thick and has a small surface area. But when I stretch it, it's going to have a much bigger surface area, and also, Roger's like, help! This is not in my job description. It's much thinner now. Same amount of material, different surface area. However, this video is on shrinking, not stretching, so let's do the opposite. See, it's as easy as that, and it's much thicker than it just was. Something to keep in mind. This may be a little bit more advanced, but that's why it's often better to shrink form instead of stretch form, because when you stretch form, you're making a bigger surface area, which is thinning it out, which is thus making it a little bit weaker depending on the material you're using. But if you make it thicker, you got a little bit more meat to work with. It's gonna end up being like, and you'll have a little bit of ripple at the end, but it's gonna smoosh in together. If you still don't understand, don't worry, I'm gonna make that piece of metal into a dome for you. So you'll see from this process, with a couple minutes of hammering, I've already got a very rough dome started. And I can keep going with this and get it tighter and tighter and tighter if I wanted to. However, I think we get the point across. This is also 19 gauge steel, which takes a good bit of working to actually shrink by hand. If you're doing this with like a softer material like aluminum, it goes a lot faster. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, Ryan, I don't have a stump in my backyard that I can just hollow out into a bowl and do this with, but I do, however, have a mallet like this, or I can get one. There's another option for you, and that's called the tucking fork. This is one that I made myself on a whim because I needed it in a very particular use. So the way this works is very similar to the stump, but instead of using a mallet to force these crinkles into it, instead you can use the fork, jam it into your piece, wiggle it one way, wiggle it the other way, and make the same peaks as you would with the stump. And then hammer that fold into itself, and it will shrink the surface area. One thing to keep in mind, when you're hammering these folds in, it's a peak like this, right? If you hammer straight down that peak all the time, it's gonna wanna walk right back out. But if you hammer it into itself at an angle, back and forth, it'll kind of walk it in and really force it in on itself. Everyone thinks of steel and metal in general as being like really tough, right? And yes, there are varying degrees of steel that you could not do this with because it would be too brittle. However, a mild steel like this will allow you to do this because it is malleable and it is ductile, which means basically it's kind of like Play-Doh, but really, really, really expired and does not taste nearly as good. But it is like, you can bend it, right? If you can bend it, you can probably do what we're doing right now. It's hot today. Why do I do this in this weather? We need AC. So you're not worried about domes, right? I get that. This was just a exercise to show shrinking. Let's go to a more practical use. For our third way to shrink steel, we're going to use what's known as a Lancaster style shrinker or a hand shrinker. Let's say, for example, you needed to make a bracket and you have a 90-degree piece bent of steel. What you could do is actually make it curve by shrinking the edge. Let me demonstrate. So the way this machine works is when you pull this lever down, these jaws will come together in two ways. The first way, they're going to come together vertically. Then once they're together vertically, they're also going to squeeze together this way, which will force the material into itself. Much like we were doing before, however, this is much more efficient, and it's later in this video because we're going up in degrees of advanced tooling. Now, throughout this entire video, you're going to see us use different metal shaping tools. Some of them are extremely niche. We're going to link those tools or an equivalent to those tools in the description down below. If I wanted to take this piece of steel and curve it, I can use a shrinker, stick it in here, push down, and it'll pull it together. And if I go through consistently and try not to overdo it and keep about the same depth every time, I will get a consistent curve to that steel, as you can see. And if you look close here, you'll see that it also leaves bite marks behind, which is what makes this tool a little bit undesirable to some people because, you know, your surface finish is very important, and the more imperfections you have is the more you'll have to grind off later, which will then make your material thinner. However, to go back to what we said before, When you shrink a material, you're actually making it thicker. So if you grind that down, depending on how marred it is, you're probably okay. There are also varying levels of shrinkers like this. This one's extremely basic and will leave a lot of marks. There are other higher end tools that will leave less and less marks and will be way more efficient, like an Urco or a craft former. Let's go one step further. I know this is the beginnings of shrinking on steel, but we can go even further than this. If say I wanted to just have more than one dimension of bend, I can flip it this way. Then now, I can shrink it and get to do a little bit more. Now it not only does it bend this way, it'll bend this way as well. See where we're going here? You can make edges to, like, say you're doing a floor plan. Say you're doing a floor pan on a car and you needed to also make the new brackets for the edges of the center tunnel or wherever not because it's rotted out. Just like this. This is how I do it. Bend over a piece of steel, shrink stretch to the edge, get it to the shape you need it to go, weld it in. Now you have a nice flange to spot weld to for the floor. Now let's say you wanted to go a step further, right? This tool is limited to just the edge of what you're shrinking. If we go back to our dome here, I'm going to show you an even different tool that works very similarly. Similarly. We're going to go to a different tool that works very similarly. We're going to use a tool that is very similar to this one, but is a little bit more advanced. This is our fourth way to shrink steel and is a deep throat shrinker stretcher. I can't not. I am 12. I have it set up to shrink right now, and if I step right here, because it's kick actuated, jaws do the same thing. They go down and they go together, just like the other one does. However, you'll notice that because it has a deep throat, you can actually go deeper into a panel. Going back to our dome, I'm going to teach you how I consistently shrink with a tool like this. So with the Lancaster style one, you're stuck to the edge, right? You can only go to that deep. With this one, you can go as far to the center if you wanted to. So what you can do is picture it like pie slices, right? If you make little triangles, you can kind of keep track and think about how much you need to shrink. If we go back earlier to the paper demonstration, when I folded the paper, the further down to the tips, there was more overlap on the paper. So if you think of it in the same vein, if I were folding this, it would leave a pie cut like that, and the overlap would be thicker towards the edge. That means the edge would need more shrink to cause it to dome. So how do I apply that to this? I'll show you. I'm going to kind of dance along the edge here, just on the edge itself. Help round it over. Now I have this half here shrunk a lot more than the other half, and you'll see it's a way better curve than this side is. Oh, so you want to go a step further than this? You want to know what tool is more advanced than this bad boy right here. The next tool I'm going to show you, which is number 5 in the ways that we can shrink steel, will get you a similar end product, but even better because it won't leave this marring. Let's go over to the PULLMAX. This is a Liebert shear that we've converted to be a PULLMAX style reciprocating machine. And what that means is when this motor is turned on the back end of the machine, there's a rod that runs through it and rotates this cam, which makes these two jaws go up and down without ever fully colliding. First though, I need to change these jaws out. These are Delrin dies that are made for shaping aluminum so that it doesn't mar as much. If I run steel through these, it'll eat up these dies and it'll be a waste of time and money. So I'm gonna switch them over to steel first. These dies are called thumbnail shrinking dies. You have a lower and an upper, and you can see they interface to each other with a peak in the back. If you were to imagine a piece of steel between these and it's crushed together, what kind of shape does that make? Does it look like a little bit like a peak from before when we were trying to, you know, hammer out those peaks that we tucked or whatnot? That's right, class. Yeah, so the way these work is very similar to what we were doing before, but it's way more automated and it works way more efficiently. Let me put these dies in and then I'll show you. Dusty. Put your tools in the body shop, they said. It'll be fun, they said. It's fine, everything's fine. Is this a hammer? This is when Tony's not here. This is definitely a little rigged up because we converted this Liebert shear to be like a PULLMAX to save money, because a real PULLMAX is like a lot of money right now. Like you're talking like 10 grand US dollars in the US in our area to get like a running one. I think it's like if it's a good deal. Also important, googly eyes. Makes every tool 10 times cooler, especially when you have one. He has a little bit of character, you know. He lost his other one in a fight with a PULLMAX. Yeah. He won, just, you know, lost an eye. So just like the other kick shrinker over there, the deep throat one, I'm gonna do the same practice. I'm going to take this tool and I'm going to run it up to the front and run it straight back, run it up to the front, run it straight back. But I'm also going to do the same passes at different depths. That was not a very good line. I'm gonna do the same passes at different depths here. So for this exercise, I'll probably do 3 different depths, maybe 2, because it's not that big of a piece. Do a pass almost to the center, a pass halfway, and a pass just the edge. One thing to keep in mind though, these dies right here only work from about here back. So you need to make sure that when you're using this tool that you're going in far enough that it'll cause it to buckle and then come back over it. I'll show you here in a second. So I'm gonna go through and shut it off. You can see how it makes a peak. It forces a peak right there, right? So now, if it's still running and I go back directly over it, it's gonna keep forcing it together and cause it to shrink. Just like that. All right, so on this half-ish of the circle, I did passes almost the whole way to the center. Now I'm gonna go through and do it a little bit shallower and a little bit shallower again, and you'll see how I'll start to dome out. Now that I did this first pass too, I'm probably gonna go around and do the entire thing with this machine, because you'll notice on the surface, it may be ripply, but it's not gouged like the other tooling did. Pretty neat. Look, there's a dome appearing. It's like a little hat or a symbol.
Oh yeah, it does look like a symbol.
A crash symbol or something.
Yep.
Because this piece is so small and how these dies are shaped, it's very hard to get a shrink just on the edge, because what's happening is when I run the machine up through, it's hitting here and not quite getting the kind of wrinkle it should have to shrink. So I'm a little limited with how small I chose to make this dome. If I were to cut it, you know, cut it here, we'd have a nice dome there. But what could I do? I could use a collaboration between the 5 different methods we just used to make it a perfect dome, or I could just use another one and keep it to 2, which is what I'm gonna do. Something to keep in mind in metal shaping is that consistency is one of the most important things that you can do. If you're consistent in what you do, it'll help make sure that you don't have a ripply, messed up, botched panel on the end. And if you keep track of what you do along the way and do that consistently as well, if you make a mistake, you can just undo what you previously did. If you think, oh, I need to shrink something to make it go a certain way, and you actually need to stretch it instead, just go back and re-stretch it. Problem solved. Getting pretty close. Paper dome. Dome made exclusively with shrinking. Is it perfect? No. Could I make it perfect strictly through shrinking? Yes. It would be a waste of time to use only shrinking, and that's in a later video for sure. However, I'm gonna go through here and use our planishing hammer to kind of just clean this up a little bit so you can see a nicer dome. So drop a comment down below if this video was helpful to you in any way. We plan to do multiple videos every month on this brand new metal shaping for beginners series. And in that same vein, I happen to have just bought the world's cheapest auto body metal shaping tools you can buy online. Should we do a video trying to use those to make something cool? Let us know. As always, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll catch you next Saturday.